Let's just open up in prayer and then we can start. Thank you, Father, for this wonderful opportunity to discuss your word, specifically on this special day, the 8th day of the Feast of Sukkot. Father, I just ask through your Spirit to reveal your truth to us that's applicable to us in this time that we're living, and also reveal to us what you want us to know in the preparation for your coming. I ask it all in the mighty name of Yeshua Mashiach. Amen. Amen. All right, so we made it. It's day 8. And I wanted to do a short study, but I couldn't help myself. So I'm going to jump a few slides, but I got stuff in there. So if we get stuck in the topic, we can spend some time there. So the study is basically divided into 2 parts. The first part is just dealing with the number 7, which is the 7th day of the feast, which was yesterday. And the second part of this teaching is the 8th day, which is today, and also preparation for the next cycle. So that's the 2 main themes. Dealing with the number 7 and everything relating to number 7, it includes the Feast of Trumpets, Yom Teruah, not Feast of Trumpets, Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, as well as Sukkot, the first 7 days. No, not Passover, just Tishri, 7th month, just the number 7, and just a few notes on there for those who haven't been in the previous studies. I've got a few slides just to recap. All right, so can you see that? No, it looks like you can see it. I've got a beautiful picture of a butterfly there. Now, the intent of the butterfly is to visualize symmetry and a mirror image. So if you take a piece of paper, you fold it in half, you put paint in it, and you squeeze and you open it up, you'll normally get a sort of a butterfly picture. And if you do the same with the Feast of Passover and the Feast of Sukkot, they fold and create mirror images of each other in the same way. How they mirror each other is they're both 7-day festivals. Both of them have an 8th day, where Passover's 8th day was in the beginning, which is Nisan 14, which is known as Passover. The Feast of Passover is actually a 7-day feast called Unleavened Bread. Passover is also referred to in the New Testament as the Day of Preparation. And if we follow the pattern and we overlay that with Sukkot, which is a 7-day festival, then there's an 8th day, then that is also a day of preparation, if you mirror that idea. And the day of preparation for the 8th day is what is to come. Now, if you look there in the middle, I've got a 7-day week cycle, of which the 7th day is the Sabbath. Now, if you count in a week, day 1 to day 7, and you get to day 8, it is day 1 of the next cycle. So in that same argument or pattern, the 8th day of the Feast of Sukkot is day 1 of the next cycle. The next cycle of what? Sukkot is the last feast of the feast cycle. So the 8th day represents the day of preparation for the next feast cycle that's coming for the next year. And it's also to do with Shimchat Torah, which is the turning back of the Torah, which is the preparation for the Torah cycle. So this day of preparation that we're in today is the day of preparation for the next cycle. It also has a prophetic picture of the future 8th day. And if you overlay that, let me just jump. I've got a slide for it. Just bear with me. Gee, where did I put it? Oh, there it is. So the prophetic timeline, if you look at creation cycle of 7 days, according to Yahweh, that's a quote in Psalm, Peter quote the same, he said that 1,000 years is like a day and a day is like 1,000 years from Yahweh's point of view. So day 1 to day 6 is the same as 6,000-year period. Yahweh created man on day 6, and he's taking him to create humanity over a 6,000-year period. The reason I say that is humanity need to be completed in their final stage, which is a renewed body. That couldn't have happened unless he done work around the 4th and 5th millennium at his first coming. to provide his spirit, which will then do some more creation work within humanity in order to elevate them to the state of his blueprint of his creation of humanity. Now, I believe then when he created Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, they were in a perfect state until they fell to a lower state. And the creation of humanity is actually a restoration or recreation of humanity that takes 6,000-year period of the work of Messiah. Now, the 7 Moedim, or the 7 festivals, are also the 7 phases of the recreation process of restoring humanity back to the Garden of Eden state before sin came. So there's a lot of work that the Messiah have to do in order to restore us back to the Garden of Eden state. And that takes 8,000 years, so to speak, or his work is 8,000-year period of time. So the 7th day overlays with the 7th millennium. The 7th millennium is also the Sabbatical Millennium, which is a 1,000-year peace where Satan is bound. And that forms the pinnacle or the center of all the events within this cycle connecting to the next cycle. So the 8th millennium is actually the starting of the next 1,000-year cycle of the recreation or restoration process of humanity. Now, I believe when you read Revelation, it talks about there are people inside the city, inside the temple with Yahweh, and there are people outside, if you connect that to Zechariah 14. Now, the people outside need to go up to Jerusalem here after year to celebrate the Feast of Sukkot, and if they don't do that, they'll be cursed and there won't be any rain. So that means that they have to go through the process that we are currently in. We will be elevated to the bright level or the restored level, having renewed bodies. And the people who haven't been privileged enough or taking part of the process of restoration that we're currently engaging in, they will be outside the city and they still need to go through this process. So there's a next cycle coming for them. So that's my own interpretation of the cycles if you look at the patterns and how they play out. Revelation 21 verse 1 to 2 says, "And I saw a renewed heaven and a renewed earth. The former heaven and the former earth had passed away, and the sea is no more. And I, John, saw a set-apart city, the renewed Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from Elohim, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband." So that's the time frame of the new city, the new temple, the new tabernacle, which is the 8th day event, which is the starting of the new cycle. And we're going to celebrate that prophetic event today by recognizing that and discussing it and get our heads around what we can expect moving into that next phase. But prior to entering into the 8th day, we still need to go through the 7th day. We still need to finish the 6th day. And we all know there's a time period that's depicted by the Jordan. Jordan means judgment. And that's the time of the second coming of Messiah, where there will be destruction of Babylon. It's also the gathering of his people and also the judgment of the system and the people that's still entrenched and engaged in the system. And then after the 1,000 years, the bride will come down and Yahweh will establish a new heaven, new earth, and a new tabernacle amongst these people and live with us forever. So that's just a prophetic overview of the 7th day and the 8th day and what we can expect in the future. All right, so we know Sukkot, like we saw last time, is on the 7th month. It's a 7-day feast. It's the 7th full moon. So there's a lot of number 7s. But I've highlighted 2 numbers here, number 14, number 22 as well. Specifically number 22, we're going to see that a bit later on. So just keep that in the back of your mind. That will link into something else a bit later on. But the main picture I want to color in here is that Sukkot and Passover form the 2 outer branches of the menorah if you place them on a 7-branch menorah, and they connect, and they're also mirror images of one another. The one is the starting point, entering into the work of Messiah. The other one is the final events of the completion of the work of Messiah and the starting of the new cycle. So Pesach actually give you the process or allow you to engage with the work of Messiah. It will allow you to enter into the covenant and for the restoration work to be done within you. And it will take up to the point of a Sukkot prophetically to complete that work within you as well. So there's a personal, spiritual level, there's a prophetic level as well, and then there's the physical feast. So whenever you engage with a feast, that's what you need to have in the back of your mind for Yahweh to do his work while you celebrate this day. All right, cycles of 7, the end. So basically, the number 7 depicts the end. It depicts the end of the creation cycle. If you read Revelation, it's a lot of 7s there, and it's the 7th trumpet, and 7 seals, and the 7 bowls. Everything concluded that final judgment prior to the gathering of the bride and the starting of the 7th millennium. So those 7s actually depicted the end of that process. And then you have the time period, the 7th millennium, which is it's like a Sabbath. And then the 8th day is the starting of the new cycle. So we're just going to finish off the cycles of 7, which is first and foremost linked to Yom Teruah. So just to quickly recap, Yom Teruah is one of the feasts that's in the 7th month. The number 7 is the word Sheba. That comes from the root word Shaba, that means oath, to take an oath, which is linked to a covenant, and it also means a curse. So what we see with the number 7, there's a positive and negative meaning connected to that. So all the number 7s, which relates to cycles, have a promise of something good and a promise of something bad. Judgment. So if you don't adhere doing the Sabbath, there's consequences, which is a curse. If you don't engage with the festivals, there's consequences that has to do with staying in the cursed state that you're in. Because engaging in the festivals or the processes of the work of Mashiach is the blessing of the restoration of your inner man, of the elevation of your soul up to the state of the renewed state that Adam had before sin came. So what's evident here is the number 7 is it's got a crossroad, and you have a choice whether you want to work with Yahweh or whether you want to go be stubborn, do your own thing, but there will still be consequences. So that's just a little backdrop there. I'm going to delve a bit deeper into the end times in relation to Matthew 24, but later on I've got a chart that will explain that. Just for the example of explaining the picture here is that the 7 trumpets of Yom Teruah also depict the 7th year of the tribulation, of which the last half is called the Great Tribulation, and the first half is called the time of sorrows. And it's also the time prior to going into the birth, which is the Great Tribulation. You get birth pains, which is the time of sorrows. So there's a time period that needs to happen there. Okay, David's asking for later, what would be the difference between the new heavens and the new earth in the standard translation and renewed heavens and renewed earth in this translation? Shabbat looks like half of Shabbat and partly makes sense that the Shabbat of the Lord is an oath between Elohim and a curse for those who defile it. Yeah, so that's basically summing up what I just said, is the Sabbath is a blessing, and if you engage with it, you'll gain the benefit of the blessing. If you don't do it, you'll stay in your cursed state, or you can even receive a curse as a result of that. The curse is depicted by the consequences that we read in Revelation during the time of the tribulation, which is actually just a time of grace. That's the time of the shaking. It's the time of the harvest where Yahweh will shake the earth, and a lot of people will want to know what's going on. A lot of people will come in to the kingdom. And there's passages in Revelation that says there's so many people standing before the throne of Yahweh that you can't count them. And they came in as a result of the harvest, as a result of the tribulation. So the tribulation is a period of grace to the nations. It's not a period of Yahweh is angry at them and he just wants to smite them and kill them off. It's a period of grace. And the way he's presenting the tribulation is in a form of a loving father wanting to wake up his children. So that's what we need to have in the back of our minds if we study his words specifically regarding the end times. All right, the great day of the feast. John 7, verse 37 to 38. Yeshua said, now on the last day, the great day of the feast. Now, some people interpret this as the 8th day, which is not correct. Because the great day, he refers to the water pouring ceremony, because he referred to waters of living water coming from him. The last time we looked at the water pouring ceremony, that happened after the first day of the feast, which was not a Sabbath, and it continued until the great day, the 7th day of the Sabbath, of the feast, and not the 8th day of the feast. And Yeshua cried on the 7th day of the 7 days feast of Sukkot, which was called the great day of the feast. Another thing to be mindful of is what happened on that day. It was a day of celebration, but it was also a day where they celebrated salvation. Now, in the context of salvation, salvation is always in the context of judgment. You don't need a miracle if you don't have a need. You don't need salvation if there's no judgment or no threat. So salvation is always in the time frame of judgment. So when they sang the great Hosanna, Hosanna Rabbah, it's in the context of salvation and in the context of judgment. And this is at the end of the 7th day, which is prophetically at the end of the 7th millennium, which is at the end where Satan will be released, where the second battle will happen. So the first battle happens at the beginning or prior to the beginning of the 7th millennium, which is Armageddon. And then at the end, if you read Zechariah 14, you'll see there's another war happening, which is called Gog and Magog. Now we're going to read about that a little bit later on in the book of Zechariah to confirm that. And I'll show you the symmetrical pattern on the Menorah pattern of the end time events with the Sabbatical Millennium right in the middle. And you can see the symmetry and the interpretation and how Yahweh still made that butterfly wing effect and the symmetry mirror image of what happened prior to the millennium, what's happening after the millennium as well. And with the 7th day right in the middle. So Hosanna Rabbah, or the great Hosanna, the great day of salvation, that's where they poured out the waters. And the waters they refer to in here is Isaiah 12, verse 2 to 3, where he said, behold, Elohim is my salvation, which is the word Yeshua. I will trust and not be afraid, for Yahweh Elohim is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation, which is again Yeshua. Therefore you will joyously draw the water from the springs of salvation, which is Yeshua. And we saw that last time when we looked at the Feast of Sukkot, that the waters they draw from, they call it Yeshua. And the one who went and get the water, they called him the sent one. And when they came back, they played a flute, which is called the pierced one. So everything was prophetic. Even though it's in the Talmud, it's still prophetic of Mashiach, because they based that water pouring ceremony on Isaiah, which is a prophetic word. So they're still complying with Yahweh's word. And I believe Yahweh inspired those traditional practices to demonstrate the work of Mashiach. Now, during the end, when they pour the water, they have a golden jug and a silver one with wine, one with water, and they pour them together, which is the water and the blood that flowed from the side of Mashiach. And that's how Sukkot connect with Pesach. Yet again, made that connection. And that's what they celebrated on this great day. And that's where Yeshua said, come and drink from me. Waters of living water will pour from you. And he made the connection of the water to his outpouring of his spirit. So water is normally relating to word, which is the word Mayim, but the word is inspired by his spirit. Therefore, his spirit is also connected to water as well. Now, I'll have a beautiful picture at the end with the tabernacle where we have the word and the water in symbolism. So we'll touch on that a bit later on. So this is our messianic understanding of this. Now, on the great day, they circled the altar 7 times and they shouted, save us, 7 times as they walk around, and they beat the willows while they did that. And that's the practices, and the salvation was basically similar to Jericho. Now, if we hear about 7 times circling something, Jericho is circling something 7 times. That happened after they entered the promised land. So it's the great salvation act of doing that, similar to Jericho. Now, Jericho means, look, moon, or new moon. And that's what Yom Teruah is about. You observe, you see the moon and say, look, there's the moon. That's also the word Jericho. And the first thing they had to do is to overcome the enemy as soon as they hear the trumpet and see the moon. And what was the first enemy they had to overcome? The giants. So the giants in the land are currently depicted by one of the people or the nations that link to the moon is people worshiping the moon god, which are the Muslims. And they are occupying the Temple Mount. So they are the first people which need to be encircled and removed for that new temple to come down. So that's also depicting of the Jericho battle, the removing and the cleansing of that as well. All right, so that's the seventh day. Just a quick one, preparing for the end. So like I said previously, every feast, it's okay to celebrate the feast. It's normally a joyous occasion to celebrate the feast, but the feast loses its essence unless you prepared for that feast. If you don't do any preparation, you'll have a very sad festival. If you do a lot of preparation, you'll have a great festival. Just like when you move into a Sabbath, they normally have a time before the Sabbath to get everything right, and then you can enjoy the Sabbath. If you haven't done your preparation, you will not have a nice Sabbath. So the preparation or the day of preparation is pinnacle for enjoying the next cycle. And that's why this day is so important for us to lay the right foundation and also spiritually to prepare ourselves to enter into the new Torah cycle, to enter into the new feast cycle, and also to enter into the new prophetic cycle. And we need to be ready to accept whatever's going to happen. Sometimes it might be something bad happening. There might be something happening with your family. Whatever happens, doesn't matter. It's Yahweh still in control. And that's what we need to know. And it's all about the preparation of the heart. So the word sukkah is the Hebrew for tent. And sukkah means hut, lair, booth, cottage, covered, pavilion, tabernacle, or tent. No, hut or lair is...
It's actually pronounced layer.
Layer.
Liar is someone who doesn't tell the truth.
Okay.
Layer, and it's the,
layer. So layer is found in Psalm 110 verse 9, which talks about, is it this one? Yeah. It's a negative connotation to the word that's connected to caves. Now in Revelation 6, we read about people who will hide themselves in caves. So they're going to build themselves little sukkahs, which is sort of a protection during the end times. But their option is to dig a hole and hide in the cave. So that is the wrong way of a tent or a hiding place. The right one is connected to Yahweh's tabernacle, which is his hiding place. And what we saw last time, it's connected to the chuppah, the canopy, and the marriage, the marriage of the bride and the groom. It's also connected to Psalm 91 with these wings and the shadow of the Almighty. So that sukkah that you're going to sit under during the time of judgment is his protection for the righteous. If you read Revelation, it talks about the woman that will be given wings. She will be taken away and looked after for 3.5 years. There's protection for her. So we don't have to fear for the terrible time that's coming, which is the time of the harvest, because we are the laborers who are going to be used during the harvest to bring the nations in during the time of the big shaking. So it's not earmarked for us. We are supposed to do something during that time. So the word sukkah comes from the root word sakak, that means cover, defend, hedge, join together, set, and set up, or shut up. It's first used in scripture in Exodus 25 verse 20, where the Ark of the Covenant with the two cherubims were covering the mercy seat with its wings. And that's the place where Moses had communion with Yahweh. So communion is the word dabar, that means to speak, to answer, to point, to command, to declare, a name, promise, rehearse, and teach. And it's also the word where he spoke things into existence. So it's linked to creation as well. So since we're on the 8th day, which is the first day where Yahweh said, let there be light, he used dabar to do that. But it's also the place of communion, of sitting in his shadow, learning from him, because it also means to teach and to learn. And that communion is the right place to be, where you will stay in his protection and he will teach you the way, what you need to do during that time. So that's the two opposites of how people will react. Yahweh's people will come together and sit under the shadow of the Almighty, learning from Him, listening to His creative words during that time, what they need to do, where they need to go, just like He led Israel through the time in the wilderness after they left Egypt. And the wicked will go and dig themselves holes and caves and hide in there and curse God. All right, so we came from Yom Kippur to Sukkot. This is just a little recap. It's in the same context of the end times. What we saw last time that was really ringing true to me is Isaiah 58 verse 6, which basically give us the intent of Yom Kippur. Why is there a Yom Kippur? Now, Yom Kippur is salvation for the nations, or salvation for the nation, intercession for the nation. And their sins that will be taken away, and the blood that will be taken into the Holy of Holies to atone for their sin. So we get that full picture of this, the sacrifice of Mashiach, whom John the Baptist said, there's the Lamb who will take away the sin of the world, which is technically not correct unless you connect that lamb also with the goat, the scapegoat, that took away the sin of the world. Now, the sin of the world is the sin of the nation, and that's the only festival that dealt with the sins of the nation. The normal sin sacrifice was for a personal sin, which you do anytime you want to bring an offering because of your sin, unconditional sin. The only sacrifice that paid for deliberate rebellious sin is the Yom Kippur goat and scapegoat. And that's why this sacrifice pays for all the sin of the nations who rebelled against Yahweh. So if they repent, they can come in. And that's summarized in verse 6. And it sounds just like the verse when Yeshua announced himself as the Mashiach, liberty to the captive, sight to the blind. It's in the same language. He said, is it not the fast that I have chosen to loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke? Now, a yoke is something that leads to bondage. The yoke is also connected to the letter Taf. Letter Taf is also connected to death. So yoke of sin and bondage normally leads to death. And Yahweh wants to break those yokes that are currently upon the nations so they won't be completely separated from Him for eternity. That's what the meaning of death is separation. He wants to break that yoke to reunite His creation with Him and all humanity back unto Him as He intended when He created Adam and Chava. All right, so that's just a quick one on Yom Kippur. The other thing that confirms that is the number of bulls that were sacrificed. 70 bulls were sacrificed, and the number 70 always relates to the nations. And just for interest's sake, they sacrificed 13 bulls on day 1, then 12, 11, and up to day 7 bulls, and together it adds up to 70. And on each day there was a goat sacrifice, similar to Yom Kippur as well. Moving from Yom Kippur to Sukkot. So I'm very sensitive for patterns, numbers, cycles, and all those things. So whenever there's a time period, I'll look into it. And every Hebrew word has a number as well, and every word or number has a meaning. So there's 5 days between Yom Kippur and Sukkot. So what does it mean to travel for 5 days, or to move through a 5-day period up to the next feast? Now, Yom Kippur is about the fast, it's about judgment, it's about the nations coming in, it's about the harvest, so it's a doom and gloom time period. So what does the number 5 means? Moving into the 7th day, or the 7-day feast,
Grace.
called Sukkot. So number 5, first and foremost, means grace. It's also the number for the letter Hey. Now, the letter Hey is the letter that is the sound of breath, if you exhale. And breath is the word Ruach. So Hey connects to Yahweh's Spirit, Ruach HaKodesh. It also, you can see the little letter there, it's got a window, a little opening. So Hey also means light. It also means truth. And that's why the letter Hey actually represents the Spirit of truth. And truth is what you need, if you want a definition of truth. If you're in a state of darkness, you switch on the light and reveal everything as it is. That's the definition of truth. So without light, you will not know truth. And Yahweh's word, through the revelation of His Spirit, gives true light and reveals the ultimate truth regarding all of Yahweh's things. So that's the 5 that we need. So his grace is given to us through his spirit that was given to us. And that's what we need for this dark time that we're still in, because we're traveling from Yom Kippur to a Sukkot, which is the feast. So it's still a time that's associated with judgment prior to entering into his rest. Now, the other words that also add up to the number 5. Now, when you look at little Hebrew words here, you can see the Gimel and the Bet. So they collectively add up to number 5. One is 3 and one is 2, for example. Now, all these words and their meanings support this time period that we're coming from, that we're moving into. So the first word means, is the word agi, that means I shall increase. And that is in context of the prophetic picture of the nations that will come and increase your tents, increase your doors, so the harvest can come in. The next one is spoil and booty. Now, spoil and booty in relation to Psalm 45 and Psalm 2 is the inheritance of Yahweh, which are the nations. It's also the promise given to Abraham. He will be a blessing to all the families of the earth, which are the nations that will come in. So the nations are the spoil and the booty, and they shall increase. The next one is locusts. That has to do with Revelation 9:3, which is the plagues and the first woe, or the fifth trumpet. The next one is pit, or the den of lions. That's also related to Revelation 9, where the locusts came out and had teeth like lions. There's also to do with the abyss opening up and all those symbolism there. The next one is gob. That means cistern, and that connects back to Isaiah 12. We talk about the drawing of the water from the wells of salvation, or the cistern, or the place that holds water. And so all of that still connects to the harvest, or the symbolism and the things we read about what's happening in Revelation. So between Yom Kippur going up to Sukkot, it's actually a 7,000 year period, because Sukkot happens at the end of the 7,000th year, or the 7th millennium, and the starting of the 8th millennium is when everything is completely done and restored. Prior to that, there's still Gog and Magog. There's still a time where Satan will be released. He will deceive people. Fire will come down and devour the people around who come up against Jerusalem. So there's a lot of judgment things that's still going to happen, and there's still an increase that's going to happen from people that will be left after the smoke clears, and they will have to go up to Jerusalem year after year to celebrate the Feast of Sukkot. So there's still a lot of things that come into play prophetically in this number 5 that we see as we move from Yom Kippur to Sukkot. Just to quickly recap, Feast of Sukkot has many names. It's the Feast of Joy. It's the Feast of Ingathering. It has to do with the harvest, the fruit harvest. The fruit is connected to the Spirit, the fruits of the Spirit. It's also the Feast of Dedication. The eight days of the Feast of Sukkot is always used for dedicating the temple. Even Chanukah, which is an 8-day feast, was a delayed Sukkot, where they dedicated the temple. And that's why it's called the Feast of Dedication, just like Chanukah. The Festival of Lights, that's also a name for Chanukah. And that's what they did on the water pouring ceremony, or during the 7 days. They put up big menorahs, big bowls of oil, and they sang and danced and enjoyed and celebrated before Yahweh for 7 days. And they said that the light was so intense that it highlighted the whole city area, and they call that the light of the world, that place. And that's where Yeshua also said that he's the light of the world on that feast. Now, the thing I want to get into is it's also called the Feast of the Nations. Now, Galatians 3 verse 8 to 9 talks about the nations in relation to the promise, the covenant that was given to Abraham. And he basically says, if the Gentiles have faith like Abraham has faith, they will be blessed together with Abraham. Now, Abraham, we know, is the first point of call for entering into the covenant from a people's perspective, from someone he called out of paganism, if you like. And through them, the patriarchs transferred the birthright from one generation to another until Jacob came. He had 12 sons, and then it spread to a nation. And now we're coming to a point where Israel will spread it to the nations. So the new covenant is new to all those coming in. It's not a different covenant. It's the same covenant made to Abraham. It's just being extended from one person to a person with 12 sons, then to a nation, and now to nations. And it could only happen after the Messiah came the first time, because he needs his spirit to indwell people, to multiply himself and his anointing, to transfer that anointing and that covenant to multiple nations all over the world. And that's what the new covenant's all about. And that's why I said, I will write my Torah in your heart. That's the new covenant, because he will write in the hearts of nations that will accept Mashiach. And if they accept him, they have access to his spirit, and then they engage with the new covenant. And that's the living water that flow from his innermost being that they will receive, because it's the spirit of Mashiach that will make little Mashiachs or little Christians just like us today. Zechariah 14, I don't want to dwell too much. I already mentioned this, where people will celebrate the Feast of Sukkot, or the celebration of salvation. So the nation that will go up to the Feast of Sukkot after the event, after the 1,000-year period, they will celebrate their salvation. That's what this is about. And Yahweh said if they don't celebrate, now in Israel, we talked about last week, they have the same rainfall as England, up to 1,000 millimeters, but only in a 4-month period, and it normally starts right after Sukkot. And if Yahweh doesn't bless them and they don't have the rain, they will have a famine that year. So they are very dependent upon Yahweh's blessing in order to have even Passover, because it's 3 pilgrim festivals where they need to bring a harvest in. If there's no rain on Sukkot or after Sukkot, there's no Pesach, there's no Shavuot, and there's no Sukkot coming up. And Yahweh basically said the same to them. If you don't celebrate your salvation and engage with my celebrations, you will not enjoy my blessing. In other words, if you don't engage with my cycles of blessing, the number 7, my oath covenant, which will give blessing, you will get the opposite, which is the curse, which you will have no rain. So the same principle applies, and it's linked to the number 7 because they celebrate the end of the 7 cycles, which resulted in the inheritance of the nations coming in. So it does not say that they're not going to celebrate the others. It just put the focus on that one because it's celebrating the nations in the context of this verse. All right, this one I'm not going to read. This one is basically outlining Gog and Magog. It's Zechariah 14, verse 1 to 2, 3 to 5, 12 to 13, and Ezekiel 38, 18 to 23, where the symbolism talk about hailstones, fire, sulfur, and all that. And you read about that in Zechariah 14 as well, where they encircle Jerusalem, fire will come down, Yahweh will devour them. And that's basically the second battle of Gog and Magog that will happen. And that's the great day judgment, which is still before the 8th day or the new beginning. All right, so the 8th day prophetic time frame, we discussed that. This is just a quick timeline of, I don't know if you can see that. This is just an outline of where we are currently. So there is a time frame of 7 years of prosperity. This is now according to Joseph's prophecy. 7 years, 7 fat cows, 7 skinny cows, so the 7 years. 7 years. The 7-year famine is divided into 3.5 years period, 3.5 year period. The reason it's 3.5 years because you talk about 42 months time times half time. You talk about 1,260 days. So all of those add up to 3.5 years. And if you read Matthew 24, it split those two, and it refers to the prophecy in Daniel that says, if you see the abomination of desolation set up in the holy place, don't look back, don't take your laptop, run to the mountain, leave everything behind, because then the 1,260 days and 1,209 days is starting. Now, at the time of the Passover, that's normally where our Jewish brothers want to sacrifice. They want to sacrifice a Passover lamb. So they've been trying, I think, since 2009, 2010. They've got the Levites trained up. They've got everything. They've got a mobile altar. So as soon as they get access to the Temple Mount, they will start sacrifices. And if the sacrifices are stopped, that's where the first witness of Daniel will start. And when there's abomination of desolation set up at the same time period, which was back in the time of the Maccabees, a statue of Zeus. It can be now someone who speak abominable things, which represent the image of the beast, or the spirit of the beast. That will be the second witness. And if you have two witnesses, that confirms truth. And then you start counting. And if that happens around a Passover, I worked it out, 3.5 years from a Passover lands always on a trumpet, a Yom Teruah, which is a sign of the coming of Mashiach, as referred to in Matthew 24. You'll see the sign of the Son of Man immediately after the Great Tribulation. That's when the Son of Man will be. And it also said, at the sounding of the trumpet, he will gather his people. So that's the seventh trumpet, or the seventh trumpet that will sound, as you read in the book of Revelation regarding Yom Teruah. So that's the middle of the year, and then I've got a 1,000-year period, and then we've got eternity, the eighth day. I'm not going to go in detail into this. You can go through this in your own time. I've got some more things I really want to talk about. I don't want to labor this too much. This is just a bit of an outline of the bigger time frame over 6,000, 8,000 year period. This is just a zoomed in view of that same one. This is the one I referred to previously, where there were previous people here, where I said, if you want to study Revelation, I use Matthew 24 as the framework, and I hang all the things that happens in Revelation onto the events or the time frame or timeline of Matthew 24. Now, this is what that looks like. So everything that you read about in Revelation is on the left. On the right column there, you'll see all the Matthew 24 little scriptures, and they follow the time frame up to, through the time of sorrows, through the birth or the Great Tribulation, up to the end when Mashiach will appear. Now, what you see here is that the cycles of the seals, the trumpets, and the plagues, they are not sequential one after another. For example, the first 4 seals happen, and during the 5th seal, you get the trumpets, and you also get some of the plagues. But at the end, the 7th seal, the 7th trumpet, and the 7th plague, they all coincide. And that main event of all 3 of them, with their 7th event, will trigger the end of that final cycle. And that's also in line with Matthew 24. So that's just my interpretation on events, linking events between the seals, trumpets, and plagues, and aligning them. And that's basically what it looks like when you portray it in that way. So it's a bit more complex, or not complex, it's different to what I see other people do, but I adhere to the words of our master Yeshua. They ask him, when will the time of the end be? And he gave them a perfect timeline of events. So I will listen to him about the time frame, and then I'll take the book of Revelation and link that into Matthew 24. Because if you read Matthew 24, it talks about events, and then there's a story about, 144,000, and then it continues with something else, and it's sort of jumpy from one place to another. You can't really get a sequence out of it. It's all over the place. But if you do it like this, it gives it perfect structure, and things just link together perfectly in the framework of Matthew 24. Not going in that now, so you can read on that. I'll send out the notes so you can go through that in your own time. I've got the verses and everything there. This is just a picture of the same, just with little, symbolism and pictures that I did just to give you a map. So in the middle, you'll see the 1,000-year time period, which Satan is bound. It's the year of this great Sabbath. It's a 1,000-year peace, 1,000-year rest, but it's also called the winepress, according to Revelation. It's also the 7th day, which is prophetic of the 7th millennium. That's the time of prior to the beginning of the 7th year is the gathering, which people refer to as the rapture. And there's also, but it's more technically correct, as the first resurrection. And then you have the Battle of Armageddon. You have the Messiah appearing on the white horse with his garment dipped in blood. Babylon is destroyed. You get the women, the War of Babylon, or Mother of Harlots, which is the 6th day or the 6,000th millennium coming to an end. And that's the first battle that will happen, and Babylon will be destroyed. Then you get this place that's desolate. Now, if you think for yourself, after this hail earthquake, destruction, all the infrastructure is destroyed. There might be a power station here and there. There's no internet, no network, nothing. It will be like the movies when they depict this crazy, end of the world scenario. So, but that's just in my mind. So it's not to say it's going to be like that. It's just my interpretation of it. Just thinking about it. And during this time, just like in the beginning, before the flood, people grew 1,000 years old. I believe that because of I think it's the fifth trumpet, the one with the locusts, is where it turns from natural disasters to supernatural disasters. And for supernatural disasters, or the spiritual entities to come down to make war to people or to be part of the judgment, that's where the physical and the spiritual realm connects. And the only thing that separates the physical from the spiritual is the barrier of time. We are all bound underneath or enslaved by time. And you will only be released by time if you die. That's the only way to be released from time, or if you are resurrected in the first resurrection. And by seeing the symbolism of the supernatural forces engaging with the physical, give me the idea that the barrier of time is now being slowly dissolved, and we're moving into a space called eternity, which sits above time. And that's why people in the 7th millennium will not be bound by time or by death, and they will grow 1,000 years old, because that period is 1,000 years. So you might be 47. When that happens, you will be 1,047 years old at the next battle. And you will still have a very vivid recollection of the first judgment and things that happened. Now, if you read Zechariah 14, it talks about people who will be there at the end. And there's another study I've done called The Rebuilding of the City of Jerusalem on the book of Nehemiah or Nehemiah. So I looked at all the names and the meanings in Hebrew. So it gives you a deeper level of understanding, and it paints a picture of that time frame as well. And in that time frame, there will be people who will separate the righteous from the wicked. Now, the righteous that will not be the bride are our Jewish brothers, our Christian brothers and sisters who refuse to embrace Torah. It will be good people who didn't know. They were born into a culture. They did things morally right to the best of their understanding. But the wicked people, they will be, I believe, destroyed during that battle. But it's those people who will be on the earth. Now, there will be a natural separation of wicked and good, and the third temple will be constructed during that time. And the reason I say that, because there will be a place in Jerusalem where the righteous people will assemble, and the wicked people, when Satan will be released, will go and encircle Jerusalem, and they want to destroy them. And then the fire of Yahweh will come down. So there's a natural separation, and they will be part of the harvest as well. But they will be coming through the 1,000-year period.
There shouldn't be a sea, because now people are going to travel.
Yeah, there's no sea. So the only reason that there's no sea, I think the land will elevate to a point where it will be one continent, so people can all migrate to Jerusalem if they need to.
Well, that must be where it's talking about in Revelation, where the mountains will be leveled.
Yeah.
And all of them shifting of the earth must.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's going to be a polar shift, definitely. And the plates will move. Something's going to happen, and things will move up. And the sea will go to the outer ring, as we all know, which will form a water barrier around the end. And it will be like a big island in the middle, with Jerusalem in the middle, the highest point. It will be a flat plane of some sort. Not going to go in there. Tongue in cheek for those who are not followers of what we're talking about. But anyway, not going to go in there. But that's just a picture. Now, the one I want to actually share with you is the Menorah Pattern. It's exactly the same symbolism. What we see here is the middle branch is the 7th millennium. Now, either side of that, there's a resurrection, the first resurrection. There's a second one after that. There's a war, Armageddon. There's another war, Gog and Magog. There's the second coming of Mashiach. And there's the third coming of Mashiach in the form of the New Jerusalem coming down. There's a city, Babylon destroyed. There's a city, the New Jerusalem. There's a woman, the War of Babylon. There's a woman, the Bride of Messiah. So you can see the perfect symmetry between those things that sits around the 7th millennium. And what is on the 8th day is starting with the New Jerusalem and the woman, the Bride of Mashiach, and the third coming and the second resurrection, which entails that second harvest that will come in. So that basically concludes our stepping off the number 7. Now we're going to step into number 8, which is the day of preparation. So that's.
I saw Ivory wanted to say.
Oh, you want to say
something.
something?
Oh man, I was just gonna wait. I'm gonna see if anything else was gonna come because another point was made. So with the number 5, that's where I was.
Yeah.
We're going to number 8. I'm
Okay,
still on
yeah.
number 5. All right. So the number 5 being the conduit for the blending of the physical and the spiritual. David picked up 5 stones, and I remember a long time ago in my Baptist church, somebody said, "Why did David pick up 5 stones?" I was because God had 4 brothers. And I'm like, no, surely that's not it. It's got to be another reason, you know. It's not until you start to study the Hebrew and the numbers that you can pick up the fact that he said to Goliath, "You come at me with sword and spear, but I come to you in the name of Jehovah." Sabaoth. He's gonna hand you over to me. I'm not gonna do anything. I'm just gonna pick up, you know, my spiritual ammunition, and
I'm going to pick a number.
Let him do the rest. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And
And your number came up. Your number 5.
And then I noticed just then on that Menorah Pattern, you had the fifth branch was connected to a spiritual battle, God and Magog.
Yeah.
So that was like the very last one. There's another. Okay, now I'm just gonna wait.
And he was a giant, and entering the promised land, Jericho was giants. So it perfectly overlays the pattern.
Yeah.
Can I just ask one
Yeah.
question? You know, when we talked about if they don't want to celebrate Sukkot, that no rain and all that. And then in the scripture, it actually makes special mention and in Egypt, doesn't it?
Egypt as well.
I'm wondering why
Did he separate Egypt?
Because Egypt is reliant on the Nile, and basically told them that you can't bargain on the Nile for your water. You'll still receive a curse. You still need to celebrate, even though you've got a natural spring of water flowing through your land.
Well, if it doesn't rain, then the Nile doesn't bust its banks and water that area.
That was the first god of Egypt that Yahweh judged in
The Nile.
in the plains. That was the first, because each one was a judgment on one of their gods.
Yeah, so the Nile is the
Yeah,
first
the Nile,
god they judged. Yeah.
When you think about it, the source of the Nile is thousands of miles away from Egypt. So they have no connection between rain and the flow of water. The flow it just came through their land, and that was it.
They took it for granted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically just point back to say, I am the source of your life, not the Nile. And that's the lesson we need to learn. Even though we're not dependent on water, we're not dependent on the line, we just pay our bills and we get water through the pipes. We still need to recognize that Yahweh is the source of everything that I need to live today. And that's what we need to celebrate during this time. Because part of your salvation is to keep you alive as well. If you're not sustained, you will die and you will need salvation again. So celebrating salvation on Sukkot sort of is like a prepaid little thing that you do, that you can bank on during the next cycle coming. It's like depositing grace for the future, just acknowledging that Yahweh is your source. All right, number 8, you'll see a lot of water. No, not. The 8th day, new cycle, the turning back of the Torah. Now, this is our Jewish brothers, their custom where they come to the end of the Torah. They call it Shimchat Torah, and they turn back the Torah. And what they do, it takes about 45 minutes to do that. They read the last bit in Deuteronomy with the first bit in Bereshit. And it reads like this: in the eyes of all of Israel, in the beginning, Yahweh created the heavens and the earth. Now that made me think this morning, if you think about Yahweh created all, it actually says Elohim. Elohim is plural. If you listen to Mike Heiser, Dr. Mike Heiser, about the unseen realm and the council members that sat within the kingdom with Yahweh, like King Arthur and his round table, so to speak. And every disembodied spiritual entity is referred to as a Elohim or part of the Elohim. So angels, living beings, righteous people who are dead, they are effectively part of Elohim. So that made me think, when Yahweh created, everything was destroyed by water, but there was an earth. There was something covered that existed before. So making this new heaven and earth from Adam's perspective, was that Elohim the same as Yisrael, the righteous people, from the previous cycle, witnessing our cycle of creation that we are now part of? And we're going to be the witnesses of the next cycle where we will be part of Elohim, where Yahweh will create the heavens and the earth, starting a new cycle. So that's just something, looking at the patterns. And
this week we were talking, Rachel was talking to the kids and saying about explaining, the end of this cycle and rolling back the scroll. And as she was speaking, I heard that scripture at the end, it says, the heavens and the earth will be rolled back.
Roll back like a scroll, that's it. Yeah, the heavens and the earth.
Roll back to the beginning.
That's the symbolism of the Torah scroll rolled back.
Yeah.
Creation will be rolled back. A new cycle will start. A new creation cycle will start.
I've never seen it like that. Yes.
Yeah.
Beginning. Where the last.
All right, so I don't know if you guys heard it. So in Revelation, talk about the scroll, or the event where it will roll up like a scroll. It's the same as Shimchat Torah, the 8th day, the new cycle starting, which is connected to the new creations starting, which we can read this in the eyes of all of Elohim. In the beginning, Yahweh created the heavens and the earth. So the Elohim are the righteous people or beings at the point in time of the previous cycle that we are now in, where he created everything. If you look at the patterns, and that Hebraic time is cyclical, it's not linear. It's cycles that repeat. It's like a holographic picture. There's something large, but there's something small, but the small contains everything within the large, and vice versa. So those are the patterns and things that Yahweh uses in nature even. So why not being the same pattern of creation? So that's just something out there. It's not gospel. It's not the doctrine. Please not take offense by those things. It's just a bit of a midrash. All right. So Shimini Atzeret. Shimini is the 8th. Atzeret means assembly. So it's the 8th assembly. So if you think about it, who assemble? The assembly of God. Assembly is a congregation. It's a congregation, is a church. It's a fellowship. It's people. So the 8th assembly is like a massive church coming together for a meeting. The 8th assembly, and that's what Shimini Atzeret means. It's the 8th assembly. So prophetically at the end, there will be a massive assembly called the 8th assembly, where Moses, Aaron, David, your grandma, everybody will be there. And we will have this massive meeting joining together on this 8th day. So a beautiful picture, just looking at that. Just the next one down. This is connected to the number 8. The letter Chet is the 8th letter on the Aleph Bet. And it's connected to other words that also add up to number 8. So the letters are words that add up to number 8 is Ava or Ahav, that means love. As you can see, the Hey in the middle is inserted. Aleph Bet means Av or father. So the father together with the Hey, that's the spirit, makes love. So love is actually a person combined through the entity of the spirit and the father. So that's why God is love. It's a person. It's not an action. It's not anything other than a person. And you need to become in his likeness so you can express his character, his love as well. Next one is Abbas. That means to be willing, to give consent. Next one is Aveh. That means in threat, longing, and desire. And the other one is be'ah, that means entrance, coming in, and entry. It's specifically of a temple. So I've got a picture there of a temple, and the Hebrew letters that look like doorways, you will see them there. The first one is the letter Hey, second one is the letter Tav, third one is the letter Chet. Now, I've placed the Chet closest to the Ark of the Covenant, the presence of Yahweh, because it is the number 8. That's where we will enter into Shimini Atzeret, which is also another word for eternal life, Chai Olam. We will enter into that presence where we will celebrate that 8th day, the starting of the new cycle. Prior to that, you'll have a Tav. Now, Tav has two meanings. It means death. So in order to access the Chet, you have to die, like my mom and dad, they died. So they need to wait for the first resurrection. I might be alive. I might just be resurrected in the physical, being alive with them. So that's the Tav. But the Tav also means yoke. So it has to do with work that needs to be done in the kingdom. Now, the work that needs to be done in the kingdom is associated with the objects inside that room as you enter the Tav, which is the showbread, which depicts the word of Yahweh. It's the menorah, which depicts the spirit of Yahweh, which is, and last one is the golden altar of incense, which depicts prayer. So that's your relationship with you, your personal relationship with him. You need to work on that to access the Chet, that life. So just saying I'm a believer, I make that choice, well, what we do? That doesn't mean squat unless you become a disciple walking in the halakha of your rabbi, which is Yeshua Mashiach. If you don't become like him, your conversion is futile. It doesn't mean a thing. There's a lot of people who say, Lord, Lord, we've done this, that, and they say, I don't know you. What does that knowing mean? It's a word for intimacy. Where's intimacy? Holy place. Those three objects. You need to interact with his word, communion with his spirit, and consult with him through prayer. That's your work that you have to do to become his disciple. And the one prior to that is Hey. Now, Hey, we know is light. Outside is darkness. So that's the gospel message, the gateway of truth. Shining his truth. I'm the Mashiach. I want you to come in. You're part of the nations. I shed my blood for you. That's that message of that doorway. And that attracts people who are looking for light into that first doorway. The first object they face is raise an altar, sin sacrifice. Accept the sacrifice of Mashiach. Next object they face, laver, water in there. Cleansing of the water of the word. That will give you access to enter into a personal relationship with him. And then having that discipleship relationship will give you access to the Chet, the presence, the 8th day, becoming part of the bride, which is this lovely picture here of the lady entering through the Chet. The next one is a little, I know that people in Adelaide will know the slide. I stole it from my study on the Aleph Bet, specifically the letter Bet. The letter Bet depicts a house. Bet means house. And it's very applicable for the day of Sukkot, or the day of Tabernacles, to talk about the letter Bet, because it's all about the tent of, or the house of Yahweh, or Yahweh's tabernacle. Now, the tent of Yahweh, the previous letter prior to the Bet is the letter Aleph. Now, the Aleph can be made up with 3 other letters. You can see it orange there. It's the letter Vav and 2 yods. Now, if you add them up, they add up to 26, which is the same as Yotevave. So the letter Aleph is also representing Yahweh, Yotevave, through the number connection, through the makeup of the Aleph, of the Vav, and the 2 yods. Now, the Vav means man. That depicts Yeshua. The one hand is from above, the other hand is from below, which are the 2 yods. And he was the one who came from above. He's the one who did work from below. So that Aleph represents Mashiach, which is Yahweh in the physical, expressed in the physical. So that's the Aleph. But also the Aleph, if you change the Vav, now that's what I found when I did the letter Nun. The Nun Sufit, which is the Nun when it's on the end of a word, looks like an enlarged Vav. Now the rabbis teach that they call it the crowned Vav, or the anointed Vav. It's taller than a Vav, but it looks just like a Vav. Now, if a Vav is man, and if an anointed man is Mashiach, then Mashiach is represented by Nun Sufit, which is a taller Vav. And having the Nun Sufit with 2 yods, it gives us the structure of a tent. You need the center structure.
Like the second picture.
Yeah, the second one, this one. There's a little green tent behind it.
Yeah.
A little bit of this. And the two yokes are the hands that hold down. And so there are any structure, you need opposing forces to uphold strength. So the fruit of the Spirit, that's why the hands are the unseen hands of Yahweh, through the expression of the fruit of the Spirit. So the things we have as gifts are not the same. For if we all are prophets, all the yokes will be on one end and will pull that tent apart or pull it over. If we have prophecy and you have gifts of healing and you have counseling or whatever, it's different forces pulling on the structure, giving that structure strength, with the center pole being Mashiach, always the center. And that's the Nun Sufit, upholding it. And the Nun Sufit, being the anointed one, provides the largest space within that bed to contain the fullness of the presence of Yahweh, which is the Aleph, which is that Nun Sufit and the two yokes. That's Yahweh in the bed, in the house, his presence in the house. The picture below here is coming from the letter Aleph that I've done. And that's a picture of the creation of the Vav, the two hands that created the Vav. And that's a creation of man by the hand of Yahweh. There's just another picture there. The one at the bottom is when man tries to simulate the tabernacle of Yahweh. So he doesn't use the Spirit. I'll use a Vav instead. Vav looks more or less like a Yod. Don't need a Nun Sufit. I can use a Vav. A Vav looks just like a Nun Sufit. So what you have is a very flat tent, because the two things pulling them down and one upholding is the same size. So now I have this little flat pack here tent that doesn't have any room to contain the presence of Yahweh, only the presence of men. Now the three Vavs, as we all know from the soft drink called Monster, it represents 3 6s, which is the anti-Mashiach's number, who is building a house that's a counterfeit house by the hands and the efforts of man, and he sits behind it. So you see a lot of counterfeit assemblies or houses of Yahweh, which house a spirit called a Holy Spirit, but it's not his Ruach HaKodesh. It's not his spirit of truth. It's a spirit of wildfire. The anti-Mashiach will be able to call fire from heaven and do miracles. Miracle is not the thing to distinguish the real Mashiach between the false one. The false one will just do just as great miracles as the real one. So miracles is out of the question. If you are a prophet chaser, if there's a prophet in town and he tell you your fortune, he's probably a fortune teller. It doesn't mean he's a true prophet. Only a true prophet will repeat the words of Yahweh. If he tell you what you want to hear, he will tickle your ear. He's a soothsayer with a gift of enchantment, which is another word for Nachash, which is another word for the serpent. So the spirit of the serpent sits behind false prophets telling people what they want to hear, building these flat pack houses that house the spirit of the anti-Mashiach, and they pull in the people of Yahweh, which is the system of Babylon, the whore of Babylon, and Yahweh is calling them out of that flat pack little structure. Come out of her, my people, and don't be part of that, because he will judge that tent. He will judge that system. And if you are in the system, you'll receive the judgment with them. His grace, he wants to call you out. So that's why we exist today, in order to help our brothers and sisters, whether they're Jewish or Christian, to come out of those little flat tents and come and join the big sukkah, which is full of Yahweh's truth and light and celebration, his spirit, and the true Mashiach. He's present, the living Torah of Yahweh. And that's what we need to introduce them to. And that's our job. All right, enough said on the sukkah. Now, this is part of the preparation of Bereshit. The next one is linked to the letter Samech. Now, the letter Samech, it's got a long story to it. I'll show you the last slide where I came to it. The Samech is a round letter that depicts a full moon. Now, I overlaid the festivals over the Aleph Bet, and Sukkot lands right on the Samech with a full moon, the same as unleavened bread. And the Samech represents that circle. The moon depicts the cycles that's depicted by the moon cycle, the lunar calendar, the calendar of Yahweh. where his months start with a moon. You have to observe to see when the month will start, which is the feast of Rosh Chodesh, but nobody celebrates anymore. So we need to see where the feasts are. We are lazy. We just look at the Gregorian calendar and just follow the Romans or the Greeks or whoever invented that. Well, Yahweh wants us to observe his festivals. We need to look up and see for ourselves what the moon phase is, when that feast is. And if you do that, you'll be blessed. Why? Because in sync with every Moedim, Yahweh express sparks of the holiness, of glory. And I'll tell you a bit more about that in the symbolism of the Samech, where his glory will come down. Now, the point too here is that the Samech is said to be an endless and ever ascending spiral glory of Yahweh that comes down in a spinning format. The reason I believe that is when you look at nature and creation, you sometimes get the fingerprints of Yahweh all over it. Now, if you look at the magnet, most of the time, because it comes from him. Now, recently they discovered through better technology what a magnetic force really looks like. Now, when you have a bar magnet, it's normally like a little, shape around it, cyclical, elliptical circles forming the shape. But the magnetic field that comes from a magnet is actually a force that is a spiral force. When you look at the magnetic field in a three-dimensional sense, it will look like sort of like an apple. It's got a spiral force that spiral down, it comes around and it flips into itself again. And then it creates that force in the middle. So it's a spherical force that spins inside and outside. Now, the glory of Yahweh depicted through the cycles is like that spiral force that comes from above and it spirals right within. Now, the spirals that we see are time from our perspective. From Yahweh's perspective, when he looks down, time is like a circle, like a samech. When we see it, we look at it from a spiritual, physical perspective, it's like a spring coming down. Now, our time starts here and it moves up to eternity. So we'll see the spinning force going up, which is time spiraling into eternity. But from Yahweh's point of view, it's always the same. 1,000 years, one day, doesn't matter. You see it from the top. He's above time. We are within time and we experience this force. In the same way as the cycles spin, the spinning cycles connect to the number 7. It connects to the Moedim. It connects to the creation cycle. It connects to the Torah cycle. And if you engage with those cycles, guess what? You'll engage with that glory spinning down from him, but in sync with his Moedim. His Moedim are the Sabbaths, the festivals, as well as his Torah cycle. And if you are brave enough to engage with that, you'll engage with that glory in that point in time regarding that topic within your personal life and within the nation.
Right, so given what you're saying, does that mean that celebrating at the right time is essential?
Yes. It's essential. So timing is everything. In the book of Hebrews chapter 4, he says, I think 4 times, when it is today, and he emphasized that 4 times, don't harden your heart. And he emphasized today. And I thought to myself, why would he say today? What's so important about today? It was probably on a Moedim, on a feast, on a Sabbath. And it was an important message for that point in time, for that people, which is that day, which was that topic that he wanted to portray to them, because the glory of Yahweh will support that message, because that's the theme of that message.
So basically, we need to
sink in.
We need to sink in.
Yeah.
To God's time frame,
as well as the topics within the time frame,
in order to gain the maximum benefit, growth, and development as believers.
Yeah. It's like Swiss cheese. The holes line up and the glory will shine through, but only on that day. When it passes,
it's not that there's no revelation on other days, but I think
but there's more revelation
on Yahweh's chosen days.
Yes,
it's just like would like a portal.
That glory just shines through big time.
We align and he's aligned with us. So
and that's what the assembly is about.
Yes.
When you get together, he said, when there are more than one of you, I am there. His presence there. What is his presence? His Shekinah glory.
Yes.
The Samech represents that glory that's spun down in the assembly, because there's more than one person having faith regarding that message, that topic, that theme, that feast. And that also pulls down more glory on the assembly.
There has to be some reason for assembly.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the timing is when we come together. When it's today, on that feast day, on that Sabbath, we come together. Right?
Yes.
Say again?
It's the force.
It's the force. You have to rely on it. If the shower only is time to open up 2 minutes a day and it's opening up 7 a.m. and if you're not there, you're not going to get any water. You might get little drips afterwards. In the same way, you need to be in sync with Yahweh's force of glory coming down on that day. Now, the letter Samech, you'll see is spelled Samech Mem Kaf. And this is a Kaf Sufit. Now, letter Kaf means hand. Hand normally means when it's on the left, it's the hands of his people doing work in the kingdom. Kaf Sufit, which is a large hand, means it's a collective hand of all the people doing work for the kingdom as an assembly, as a collective entity. So this word Samech connects to the people of Yahweh, and in the middle is the letter Mem. The Mem represents the water. It also represents the word of Yahweh. Now it's the Mem, that's the medium that's been translated to the assembly, the Kaf Sufit, from the spiring glory and anointed message and truth from Yahweh coming down. So that's when you engage with the Samech Moedim appointed time, which is on that specific day. The water that you engage with is what normal water does. It sustains life. So when you engage with Yahweh's water, his word, it sustains spiritual life. And it's also a cleansing agent. It cleanses you from your corrupt idea, from your misconception, from your confusion. And as you engage with his cycle, specifically if you go through the Torah cycle, you'll see that that's true. The more you go through it, the more you say, that doesn't make sense anymore. Look at this. It fits the pattern. This is the truth. And then you know it because you've engaged with his Torah cycle. So the truth will defend itself. You don't have to do it. You just need to engage with it. And the more you engage with it, the more you'll be released from the yokes and the bondage of lies and confusion. And you will come out of the whore of Babylon eventually if you dare to engage with his cycles. But the key is to be in sync with his cycles and to assemble with his Kaf Sufit, that assembly.
So instead of that, the Pope that now believes in world government and no private property and all the other things is telling us the whole world has to have a Shabbat on Sunday.
Yes.
The Sunday law that we were waiting for so long. That will force us to worship
bringing the Muslims, the Hindus, and everyone together to that
one day point in time, because that's the opposer copies the creator.
Yes.
So if that's so important for the Pope, it's even more important for Yahweh, for his people to be in sync with his Moedim, because the opposing entity has got his cronies and his spiritual bad entities that will do work in his people on those days, sinking in with those festivals and whatever they celebrate. That's why it's important not to celebrate those feasts, because you will expose yourself to negative glory of a spirit which is not Yahweh's spirit. You'll open yourself up to that, and you'll be part of another house, a little flat back one with the 3 6s in it. Don't do it. Don't do Christmas. Don't do Easter. Don't do Halloween, because you'll be in a household celebrating the glory of the opposing one. Don't do that. It's stupid. It's not even foolish. All right. We're not stupid. We're enlightened. All right. Samech. Now the Samech and the Mem Sufit. Now Mem Sufit, the Mem on the end, looks exactly the same, except the Mem has got a sharp edge, the Samech's got a round edge. So what our Hebrew brothers teach is, the more you go and you engage with the cycle of the Mem, the more the Mem will round itself and become a Samech. And we know the Samech is the glory of Yahweh, and the Mem, how do you get it round? You need to be in the Mem cycle, a Torah cycle. That's where your Mem will become round, your truth, your perception of his word will become a Samech, glory. It will be a glorious truth, a revelation that will be alive, and you can't get enough of it, because that Mem has now become a Samech. His word has now become life, and his glory is now filled his words with his spirit. And we can witness it like that, just sitting here talking about these things. We talk about it for hours and we don't get tired of it because there's life in it, because we go through that cycle. We're faithful in a small thing, and Yahweh bless us greatly if we do that.
That looks like a DNA code. Connected to God's DNA.
Yeah, that's our connection.
Yeah.
And so I've got the little moon there.
I thought that reference was going to come a lot earlier than that's what the whole DNA structure.
Yeah, the DNA of Yahweh is embedded within his his word, that spins within the time frame and the cycles of his appointed times, which includes the Sabbath. And that's when your DNA will change to his DNA. Yeah. All right, so the Samech has the power to elevate anyone who dares to interact with the cycles of elevation, which is his Torah cycle, his feast cycle, and his word. Bit more on the Samech, but more or less about linking with festivals. So Pesach, you'll see, have a Samech in it. Pesach has a Seder. Seder has a Samech in it. Seder means to place things in a certain sequence and order. But we know that a sequence from a Hebraic perspective is not a flat line. It's a circle. So a Seder from Yahweh's perspective is always a cycle. But this cycle is in perfect order, and there's structure to this cycle. And the cycle rolls into another cycle upon another cycle, and they all confirm one another until the truth will just escalate and your head will explode from revelation. And I think if we had enough mental capacity, Yahweh will be able to give more revelation to us. But because of our fallen state, we are not able to contain this fullness of his truth. I think what we receive through his word now is probably 10% of who he really is, of what things are really about, because of our limited understanding due to our fallen state. But he said that you will know everything and you will be like me when you see me. So I think that renewed body will also have the renewed or the intellectual capability to absorb the fullness of him. And as you absorb more of him, you'll become even more like him. And that's how the word works. Because when he speaks his word over something, it becomes just that. If I've got the ability to absorb more about him, it's like him speaking more words over me, and I will become a better creation, receiving more of his words in my life. But we have the limited words of the Torah that's just enough to restore us. But there's more words, I believe, that will be revealed once we see him, that will make you a fuller creation that will be even more like him. So you'll be part of his Elohim eventually, subject to him, of course. We're not gods like Kenneth Copeland said. Not at all. That's not what I'm saying. We're the bride. All right, so the sequence and the order is very important. The timing is very important, as we stressed. And as I recently said, the glory of Yahweh interacts with man on those days and those timings where we connect. The feast cycles. We've got two festivals, Pesach and Sukkot. Guess what? Both of them have a Samech in them. Now, the Samech, we know, is this spiral of glory coming down from Yahweh that's got the power to elevate his people because it contains that mem, that word, which is embedded within his festival or within his Torah cycle. Now, Pesach, you'll see it's got a gateway there. We looked at the gateways. There's the chet there. So Pesach is the first one you engage with. That's the door on the blood on the doorpost. They painted the letter chet. And that will allow you to enter into the covenant to access life. But life only starts with Pesach. You need to go to unleavened bread, first fruits, Shavuot, Yom Kippur, Yom Teruah, and ultimately Sukkot before you are fully restored. So the whole festival cycle is the stages of your restoration or recreation process for humanity. And your first gateway you enter into to access the covenant is the chet, the blood on the doorpost, the blood of Mashiach. And as you enter the blood of Mashiach, now you have access to his glory and the glory and revelation of who he is. And you also have access to the letter Pei. Now, letter Pei means mouth. It also means words. And that's where Yahweh will start to speak to you in your heart. Now, going through all the cycles, Sukkot is the last one. Now, Sukkot can be pronounced in two ways. Sukkot is plural, Sukkah is singular. Now, Sukkah ends with the letter Hey. So we've got a doorway of Hey. Sukkot, we've got a doorway of the letter Tet. And when we look at the tabernacle, we had a Hey at the entrance, we had a Tet in the middle, we had a Chet at the end. Now, this is a mirror image what we're looking at now, because the Chet is now at the entrance, which is Pesach, and we end right through to the end, which is a Taf. Now, Taf is the death to the self. You need to die to make more room for him. If there's a little bit of your left inside of you, there's less room for him to fully contain you and to express himself through you. So death to the self is that what that last letter Tet is all about. The Hey in the middle, which is the Sukkah, is the interaction with his truth and his word and his spirit. And that will be part of that process. So that's what that one is all about. Next one is still the Samech. Samech is found in Psalm 145:14, where Yahweh upholds, which is the word Samech, all who fall, and lifts up all who are bowed down. So we see humiliation, humility, submission. He will lift you up with his glory, his Samech, if you are humble. And if you fall, he will lift you up. It says the righteous man falls 7 times and he stands up 7 times. So it doesn't mean that if you are a believer, you accept Yeshua, you won't fall. But the difference is that you will get up if you're righteous. If you are unrighteous, you will fall the first time as a righteous person. You will stay down and backslide. So that's not the earmark of a righteous person or a disciple of Mashiach. We will always get up, no matter how many times we fall. And don't beat yourself up. Repent, move on, and focus on Yahweh's things and get over yourself and get over it and grow spiritually so you won't make the same stupid thing and mistake again. All right, so the Samech, I'm going to touch on something that might be a bit of a creepy topic. Some people might throw me with stones and stone me outside of Talgum. The symbolism of the Samech is also the symbolism which we know in the occult or the pagan world, and that's the serpent biting his own tail. Now, the symbolism of that is eternal life. That's the basic symbol of it. And they want to gain eternal life through whatever they do, Freemasonry and whatever they do. They want to get to this eternal life. But eternal life is still true from Yahweh's perspective. So the symbolism that they adhere to is still sort of kosher, but the means to the end is not. So I don't want, I'm anointing the snake. So it's going to be an anointed snake. It's not an evil one. The reason I say that is there's a connection between the snake, the Nachash, and the Mashiach. If you add up the letters of Mashiach, they add up to 358. If you add up the letters of Nachash, they add up to 358. So Mashiach and Nachash are connected through the adding of the numbers. And we know that Yeshua was symbolically placed on a pole when Moses raised up the snake. That was prophetic of Yeshua becoming sin. So the Nachash embodied the fullness of sin. That was the Nachash that was in the garden who caused the lie, who caused the fall. But from Yahweh's perspective, he always used the problem to become the solution as well. So he's not using a fairy to come and overcome the Nachash. He used a Nachash and reverse the Nachash to be the solution to the problem. So they had to look to the snake to get healing and not to die. So Yeshua had the same symbolism. He became a Nachash, so to speak, in order to reverse the effect of the Nachash. And that's the spiritual, technical things that need to happen. And only Yahweh knows why he does that, but it worked. So we're not going to question him. He's much smarter than us.
I'm sure if you do a proper study on that, that will give some insight.
Yeah, but just the symbolism of the serpent, we all know this symbol. They've got it as a medical sign. So the serpent was coiled around the pole. And when you look from the top, it will be a serpent biting his own tail, so to speak. It will be like a circle. When you look at it from the side, it will be this coiled thing. And that's exactly what the Samech represented. This spiral glory coming down From our point of view, it's also time going up into eternity. From the top, it's eternal life. It's a samech. And that's also the meaning of the 8th day. That's where eternity will start. So the samech is the time of the end, which is symbolized by the first letter of Sukkot, which has that samech in it. The Psalm 145 used the word fall, which is the word nafal. That means to fall away or to be lost. So the work of Mashiach on the cross reversed the effect, to reverse the fallen state and to reverse the effect of those who are lost, to break the yoke of the lost, the bondage of the lost, so they can be restored again and not being falling away as through the work of the Nachash. So that's just something interesting as well. Connected to the letter Samech is the letter Ayin. And this is now just laying foundation from Bereshit that we're going to go into next week, which is the creation of everything. Now, Ayin is one of the letters that has two meanings that doesn't make sense at all. It means eye and it means fountain. Now, fountain is normally connected to water and your eye is normally connected to light. Now, water is a medium and light is another medium. So if there's a fountain of water, then the iron is a fountain of light. So it means it's like a lens where there's a very bright light shining, and it focuses the light to produce or project something. Now, if we have a projector, you have a motion picture, you have a lens, and you focus it on a white screen, you see an event playing off on a two-dimensional surface that is so real that you engage with it emotionally. Now, from a spiritual point of view, if you think about it, whatever's happening in the spiritual, which is the spiritual light, which is the word or, aleph, vav, resh, that shines through the fountain of light of the ayin, that focuses it down to a lower dimension of 2 dimensions, just like a projector screen. And it plays off in a very real way for us, but it's in a lower state. It's a 2-dimensional state versus a 3-dimensional state. In the same way, the physical is a lower dimension than the spiritual. And the iron is the lens that translates the spiritual into the physical. Now, the reason I believe that is that physicists discovered that the smallest building block of all matter is a photon, a light particle. Everything consists of light. So when Yahweh said, let there be light, it's just like getting his clay out. Now we're going to play. And he uses light to mold everything. He made man with it, he made this with it, and light is the medium. That's why he spoke light into existence. Now the iron is the lens that provided the medium to move from the spiritual into the physical, so you can mold that into a physical lower realm that looks exactly like the spiritual, but just in a lower dimension. When you touch the other side of the iron, it's actually not real. The real is actually on the other side of the lens. So whatever happens in the spiritual will reflect on the physical. That's why we pray to Yahweh to change things in the spiritual, to change it in the physical, not the other way around. Because we know the real is up there, we're only the effect of the cause. And the lens of the iron is just that. Now the iron translates the spiral of the samech coming through. Now, if I want to describe that in the medium of words or water, which is also a fountain, the Torah is the flow of the medium of ideas that come from the mind of Yahweh that initially created everything within 7 days when he spoke. But the Torah we have now is creative words that will restore or recreate his fallen state. So everything we have in the Torah is, and he said, and then it happens. But the way it's creating in you, you need to read it and start to do it, and then it will manifest in you. Then that creation will happen within you. So you need to absorb the medium that comes through the lens of the iron, through the words of the Torah, to recreate you. And that's why we engage with the Torah cycle. When he said, let there be light, that's the fullness of his truth. Now, the other analogy I can give is that Yahweh is a very, very bright light if you compare him to truth. It's everything that you want to know about everything. It's so bright you can't even comprehend it. Your eyes won't even sustain the brightness of the fullness of him. So if you can imagine that bright light, but you are currently in a very dark cave. And for you to walk from a dark cave directly into that bright light, it will totally blind you, and that truth will mean nothing. So in order for you to adjust your eyes to accept that bright light, you need to be given a little bit of light. Then your eyes will adjust. A little bit more, your eyes will adjust. And that's where the Torah cycle comes into. It just gives you enough light to a little bit of darkness in you to adjust your eyesight. Next year, you'll get a bit more. Your eyes will adjust more. And by the time we get to the 8th millennium, the fullness of his light will shine, and your eyes will be adjusted enough to comprehend the fullness of him. But those outside of the city, they still need to get their eyesight adjusted. They need to go through a Torah cycle. They need to go through feast cycles to adjust their eyesight, to comprehend the truth, to raise their level to a high level, to absorb the fullness of him. And that's the function of the Ayin, the Samech, the Torah cycle, and the cycles we engage in a fallen state to comprehend things that's beyond us, beyond our understanding of something that comes from a supernatural being that's so intelligent we can't even think how intelligent he is. It drives you mad if you even think about it. And that's what we need to try and comprehend. And if you try to explain this to people, they think you're mad because it's something they don't know. And that's what we get into when we do that Torah cycle. Now, I read the verse that the Jewish brothers read. In the eyes of all of Israel, in the beginning, Yahweh created the heavens and the earth. That's Bereshit 1 verse 1, and it's the last bit of Deuteronomy. So in the eyes of Israel, you can see the eye, the ayin, the lens that translates the words of Yahweh, of his Torah to us. He's creating. Now he is creating something in us, and we have to have that expectation of creation that will happen in me this new year. I need to prepare myself. This is the day of preparation, because next Sabbath, I'm going to start with Bereshit. And I need to be ready to absorb as much as I can, because I want to speed up this creation process in myself, because I think the time is near. So even more so, an urgency to prepare, an urgency to get myself ready for whatever adjustments still need to be done, so I can be ready to be in the harvest and be working in the kingdom and benefit the kingdom for the benefit of our Master Yeshua. So in saying that, the word Bereshit, you can see the word Bereshit bara Elohim. It means in the beginning, he created. Now, created is the action where he actually did something. Bereshit exists prior to creation. So Bereshit is either a state or an event that exists. Now, from our point of view of understanding the day of preparation, Yahweh's day of preparation was called Bereshit before he started this creation cycle. Because when he created, it was day one, let there be light. That happened on Bara, not on Bereshit. Bereshit was the state prior to that. Now, the analogy I have here with this picture is that Bereshit, like an artist, get his brushes, get the canvas up, get everything ready, think about what you want to create, meditate on it, the scene, what you want to paint, whatever. That's preparation. And then the next day, he's ready, and he will start putting some colors on the canvas. So Yahweh also had the day of preparation called Bereshit. How long Bereshit was, I don't know. But he had time to contemplate what he wanted to do. And what you notice there is, looking at the Aleph Bet, it started with the Aleph, but when you look at scripture, there's an enlarged Bet in the Torah scroll. The Bet means house. So everything flowed from the house of Elohim. And if you take the Aleph and the Bet together, it spells the word Av, which is father. So it's the father's house, and Aleph, that is not seen, he's in the realm above, reveals himself through his house, and everything that flowed through that ayin, which is now in the form of words, is Torah, is now flowing to us. And if we follow it like breadcrumbs, we'll end up in the house, which is the 8th day of Sukkot, the fulfillment of entering the house, the New Jerusalem and all that. That's that large letter bet. That's where you want to end up. And the next thing you have access to is Aleph, the presence of the Father. It's just like entering into the Holy of Holies, where the bet is the Holy of Holies, or representing that whole tabernacle. The next two letters after the Aleph and the bet is Bet Resh, which spell the word Bar. That means son. So there's a son that did work in the house of his father in order for the words to flow from him. And John said that he spoke everything. He is the word. He's the medium of the words that created everything. Everything was created through the Son. And the Son looked like what? The Aleph Tav. The Aleph Tav is the first letter and the last letter of the Aleph Bet. So that's all the 22 letters that can form any word that you need to create everything you see around you is summed up in 22 letters or sounds. That's embodied by a person through whom things were spoken into existence. The reason I say that, the Aleph Tav is the word right in the middle. It's a fourth letter that they've also fit on a Menorah pattern. The Aleph Tav is the middle branch. And everything on the right are spiritual, moves through the medium of the Aleph Tav and create everything on the other side, which is the heavens and the earth. So Yeshua is the mediator, the medium, the word and the words through whom everything was created that we know as the heavens and the earth, which is the physical realm with what we perceive of the spiritual from our point of view. And all of that was contemplated by the Father in the state of Bereshit, the day of his preparation. So even Yahweh prepared for this creation. In the same way, we need to prepare for our creation process that's going to happen. All right, this is my little picture on the tabernacle that relates to the spirals and cycles. I don't know where I got this one from. It's also from my Aleph Tav one, my Aleph Bet study, where the column of water and the column of fire stimulated the idea of what makes a column.
In the desert, columns of water.
So when you look at the tornado makes a column, and the column is made up of a cyclical force of air, and in the midst, it's still, it's quiet. And then you get the rush of everything, and outside of it, it's normal. So where's the safest place when there's a tornado? In the eye, in the center.
Right, you move with the center.
You have to move with it. So there were two columns that followed or that led Israel. The column of fire and the column of water. And I believe they were the spirals of glory manifested through the Shin, which is his spirit, the fire, and the water or the cloud, which is Mayim, the word. And you need to be in the center. And those two relates to the brazen altar, which is a place of fire, also relates to the laver. It also relates to the inside. The Shin relates to the fire of the menorah, and the Mem relates to the words or the word of Yahweh, which connects to the showbread. And all of those cycles of glory that you interact with, the cycle of the Spirit also take you through processes of spiritual growth and maturity, as you do with the word as well, because the word and the Spirit works together. So there's the external thing that happens. That's the outer court where we have now. You interact with other people. We've got this interaction of sharing ideas and all that. But you also have your personal. Let's see who's waiting for us. Sue and David. All right. So the place of intimacy has the same symbolism in it. And the symbolism are the cycles. So your personal life is just as important to adhere to his Sabbath and his festivals as it is with the assembly meeting together in those things as well. And those things will prepare you and refine you and recreate you as you enter in. So in the beginning, there was darkness, and the Spirit hovers over the darkness. On the opposite side, we have the waters above, we have the waters below, the dark waters, the waters of light, and the Shamahim that relates to Yahweh's Spirit and his word and his presence and his glory that you will access as you are elevated through these cycles of glory. All right. The next one is the most interesting one that I found in my studies. I was so fascinated about the alphabet. I tested the alphabet, just a sequence of letters, and they just as interesting as anything else. They supernaturally defined even the sequence that they're in. And what I've done, I've started with a aleph that looked like two hands that's holding a baby. It's the birth. Now, a new moon is also found as a new birth or a new starting point. So that's where you get the sliver of Shavuot. And if you count on, you end up with a full moon, which is a unleavened bread. Prior to that is a Pesach, and you can see the Samech is number 15. And unleavened bread is the Sabbath, which is on the 15th of Nisan. In the same way, Sukkot is on the 15th of Tishri, which is also a full moon. And if you count on and you carry on, you get 23 and then 29 and then 30. So the whole cycle counts through and it confirms those festivals. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail in here, but the symbolism of the letters that you can see is the seventh day of Sukkot relates to the Zion, which is the word. The word is used by a judge to judge with. That's his government system that he judges with. That's the Zion. And the eighth day, which is the letter Chet, is the entry point, which is the Sabbath, which is the point of entering into. What you also see as the opposites, the Aleph and the Taf, and the beginning of the end of time as well. Now, time has a beginning and an end as well. Time is being created on the fourth day. The fourth day is the center of the Menorah pattern as well, when you look at the 7-day creation. And anything that's in the center of a Menorah pattern is the most important of that verse or of that picture. So time is, or the sequence of time, is very important from Yahweh's perspective. And that's where he created his Sabbath and his Moedim from the premise of time. But time is also what holds us down into a lower dimension, which is the 3 dimensions we live in. Time, I express as the 4th dimension, and the 6th, 7th, 8th, whatever dimensions are the spiritual realms or heavens that you will access beyond that. And in order to access eternity, you need to move through time, or time need to be taken out. And that's where we need to die, where you need to interact with the Taf. You either die or you need to be elevated through the resurrection in order to pass through time into eternity. So that's just something interesting as well. The cycle of life and death is also found within the Aleph and the Taf. Taf means death. Aleph means the place of oneness, echad. That's also where the covenant will bring everything together. That's where the concept of the marriage comes in, where we will be unified with Yahweh. So you can either access the Aleph from the left, where you have to go through the Zion, the Vav, the Hey, the Dalet, the Gimel, and the Bet. Now, the Zion is the word, the Chet is the blood on the doorpost, the Vav is representing Mashiach, the Hey is the spirit, the Dalet is the doorway, which is also Yeshua, the Gimel is the strength of the spirit, the Bet is the house of Yahweh, and then you access the Aleph. So you can do it from that way, or you can do it from the other way. You can cheat it, but you have to go through the Taf. You have to die in order to enter in. So that is the other part. But there's still some interesting things looking at that. Now, the number 22, as I mentioned, is a link to my previous comment on the day of preparation for Sukkot is the 22nd of Tishri. Now, there are 22 letters in the alphabet. And the 22nd day of Tishri is the 8th day. And that's the final letter of the Aleph Taf. And the Taf represents the end. So they all coincide in symbolism and basically harmonize and confirm the same thing. So we go through time, which is the cycle of life and death. And in our creation, we're going to go through our 8,000 or 7,000 year period. and then we will enter into a new life with a renewed body. So that tells me that we will be elevated from this lower state, and I can explain it with the medium of the earth, water, and air, where air is Shamahim in the heavens. We're currently entrapped in the medium of water because we are 70% water. And then the earth and anything below the earth is the realm of death or the physical. So for us to elevate from the medium of water, and that's also why Yeshua had disciples, fishers of men. They were in the boat that floated on top of the water in the medium of air because they've been elevated, and they fished people out of the lower medium of the water and brought them into the boat, which is the higher medium, to elevate them. So in the same way, the glory of Yahweh's word will elevate us from the lower medium of water and move us up into the higher medium of his ruach, his air, of his spirit, of his shamahim. So that's just another take on it that perfectly fit the same pattern all the time. So what I want to emphasize here is that Yahweh's word is holographic. His word is full of patterns, his word is full of symbols, and it reconfirms everything all the time. The patterns are all over and they harmonize and connect to one another all the time. And those are the witnesses that will reconfirm truth in relation to one another as you study the word. And what I said previously as well, you can't study something unless you study it in the light of something else, because you need to have two thoughts in your mind for those two things, like a three-dimensional picture. They just differ slightly, and if you look at it, the three-dimensional thing will pop up. The spiritual revelation will pop up. Just staring at the verse for what it is on surface level doesn't mean anything. So when I studied the Aleph Bet, I look at the Aleph, but I look at it in relation to the Bet and in relation to the Taf. When I went to the Bet or the Gimel, I look at the Gimel in relation to the Bet and the Dalet, in order to see the transition. What storyline is there? What word is being formed from moving to one to another? And if I approach it from this side to that side, what does it tell me? From that side to that side. And then it colored in this beautiful picture of wisdom that I didn't know, that just comes from the Aleph Bet, which is full of the fingerprints of the Father and his intelligence, and he's telling me a lot of stories and about the spiritual realm that I didn't know about, and it's embedded in his Aleph Bet. So if you are brave enough to engage with his word, you'll be surprised and your breath will be taken away about the fullness of his revelation and truth and the greatness of our Father. So I'm always excited in starting with a new Torah cycle. I can't wait to get into the revelation. What will he tell me next? Because I will build on the foundation of last year, and there will be more this year. And I will see more things because I've seen a lot back then. And what I'm studying now in relation to what I studied then will highlight even things more clearly moving forward. So that's our attitudes, what it should be in the day of preparation before engaging the Torah cycle. So there's a bit of a head start, a bit of an appetizer for you guys. So hold on to your seatbelt.
Just picked up something else with the whole putting the alphabet out like that. I'm still on 5. But hey, on the fifth day, it was the day that he created living creatures with his
breath.
Yeah.
That breathe.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, the hay also is symbolic of the torso,
lungs,
of the lungs.
And the lungs, yeah.
Yeah. And yeah.
Philip, can you understand now why the enemy wants people to not observe Sabbath and the feast and the festival?
Because they're so powerful.
Yes.
That is the heart of everything is in those things. God appointed times.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now you can understand when you look at this lot, you think to yourself, man, I wish my whole family heard this. I wish the whole country heard this.
Yeah.
But you know what the problem is? People don't want to. They don't want to see this.
No.
They think it's mysticism. It's not.
Well, they don't want to.
It's the heart of the Father.
Yeah.
But what's sad is the church doesn't want to know.
No.
They're rejecting it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Listen to this.
Come under the law.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's devastating if you think about all the truth and all the beautiful things and the depths of the Father and the Messiah and the Spirit that we can learn about and his creation and us. And people don't want to know because they don't want to let go of their little precious
So
lives.
we get motivational speeches every week.
Yeah, tell you how good you are,
Yeah.
how great you're going to be, and
Yeah.
how rich you're going to be.
Now you can understand it says, and the truth will set you free. There's the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to unmute.
It's interesting that door of the Sabbath too, that discover that most people that come into this messianic thing enter through starting with the Shabbat.
That's
Starting
right.
to
That is the light.
That is the door.
That's the door.
Yeah.
Just like
Passover entering into.
You guys can unmute yourself if you want to make some comments or contribute to the conversation.
Is it finished?
Here we are.
Finished?
All right, let me just open you up here so we can see who we're talking to.
Have you finished, Philip?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Wasn't sure if you'd finished.
All right. Fire away.
Who's talking?
Hey?
Anyone talking?
No. Waiting for you guys to start talking.
Yeah, my computer dropped out. My computer just literally blew up, and I had to restart it again. So that's why I had to come back in. Philip, I found it very interesting the Nun Soffit that you talked about. My father, in his painting and building trade, he often talked about this word Soffit, and it's an architectural term. It's the underside of an arch.
It looks like a big.
So isn't that amazing how you've got this Nun Soffit? It caps the Aleph, and the word Soffit with a double F, S-O-F-F-I-T is the underside of an arch.
Okay.
Holds up the wall.
My goodness. Oh, that's interesting. That makes sense. Yeah. Anybody else?
I want to thank you for an amazing study, and also I think we're going to have to go back over it again as a group, and sort of just redo a few things, especially with the Aleph Beit, and just go over everything again.
Yeah, it's a lot. When I went through my notes of the Aleph Beit, it's a blessing just to reconnect with those ideas and things. It just makes you think of it from a different perspective on the same thing. It will just highlight something else that just
that study was awesome on the Aleph Beit, and it does help you to understand the rest of the scripture in what you're saying with that teaching. Yeah, especially
that would have to be the most detailed, most in-depth study I've seen you do, Philip.
Yeah, that's the one I enjoyed the most as well.
The other thing is I saw you moved from teacher to preacher. That was very good, actually. That's excellent.
Wayne, any other comments or questions?
Yeah, Philip, I know you've said it's your own personal interpretation, but I don't. My reading of Revelation talking about the second coming of Messiah, there are only two categories of people: those that are raptured up into the sky, as it says in 1 Thessalonians 4:16, and then those who are killed by the brightness of his coming and ask for the rocks to fall on him. So how could there be any more living people there if they're those that are on the earth that die, or the others that are taken up? There are three categories. Sorry, the resurrected dead, and then the living that are raptured up, and then all the wicked are killed by the brightness of his coming, and the falling rocks.
Now that's our prophet Zechariah's fault that I've got this viewpoint. When you read Zechariah 14, it aligns with the events in Revelation. It deals with the cleansing of fire and that final judgment, and specifically after the 1,000 years. And Zechariah 14 reveals people being alive on the earth during that time.
Yeah, wouldn't that coincide with the second resurrection, which in Revelation says, and the second resurrection, that those who had not been in the book of life are resurrected at the second resurrection, and then they are cleansed. Then there is a cleansing of fire.
Yeah, there's a second resurrection, and that's from the realm of death or Sheol. But in my other study that I mentioned on the book of Nehemiah, I found other evidence that supports Zechariah 14, specifically in regards to people who are still there, and that also confirms that confirms the building of the third temple, because the third temple will be managed by a prince. And in my studies on the book of Hebrews, I found the Messiah has got another role. A role as the prince, and the prince is the role of the judge, which will precede his role as the king. They will come as the prince and the judge prior to becoming as the king. He will only come as the king on Sukkot, the 8th day after the 1,000 years. He will come as the prince during the 1,000 years. And it's also a revelation where he said, we will rule with him over nations during the 1,000 years. And you ask yourself, where are they? If they're all dead, who do we rule over? So there's verses that beg questions in my mind. What does it mean? It's not enough information. And then you dig a bit deeper, read something else, and it's slowly starting to give you an idea. I do put a little caveat there and say it's my interpretation. I can't say that it's 100%. I won't put money to it. Take the bet.
You can maybe do in between Torah study.
I should actually do the rebuilding of the city of Jerusalem. That's something that I've done years back. Very rough. My English was very bad. Grammar is poor. I mean, Wendy will tell you when she started working with me, the work in progress. So I want to redo that and get some help to do it. It's I think it's a couple of chapters long. It will probably take a couple of weeks to go through it, and I only did the first, I think, 3 chapters. So,
Philip, what about the ruling over the nations? What about that being the examining the? Because we also get in the book of Revelation where it says the books are opened, and presumably they're the books of judgment or the books of deeds of everyone who has lived, and the righteous saved have a chance to examine who's there and why someone is there and why someone is not there. So, in a sense, it could be we're ruling over the nations by examining the books of all the events that have happened on the world.
If you think about that, there's also the concept of the harvest. And whenever there's a judgment, there's salvation. Whenever there's salvation, there are people who are saved. So in the pattern of the harvest and connecting to other things, it can be either or. So my opinion is the first one I explained. I've heard the one that you just mentioned as well, which can be an interpretation as well. But we probably need to see, what does it mean to rule over nations? We need to examine the words and just do a thorough study on that. I haven't done that yet. So.
And also, it also says that he shall rule the rod of iron. Yeshua shall rule the rod of iron over the nations.
This will be something that you highlight that will probably unlock the answers if we dig a bit deeper into those things.
A lot deeper.
Because I know the answers are there. We just need to find them. All right. Thanks for that. Anybody else? All righty. So I will greet you from the Holy Land, from Mount Jerusalem. Telgum, south of Mount Jerusalem, it's south or north of Mount Jerusalem.
Oh, Philip, there was when my computer crashed, I had to restart it. I lost some of the questions that I'd written down. You were talking about the structure of a magnetic field, I think. Have you in your engineering, have you come across a shape called a toroid or a toroidal figure, toroidal shape? Yeah, so that too comes out in the interaction between in the electromagnetic field. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, the torus field. Yeah.
And one of the things that they find hard to explain is magnetic fields. The other thing they find hard to explain is water.
And
Water,
gravity.
extremely complex. And there's a lot of things about water that's astounding that people recently discovered. So I think those two things, and I know water is connected to the spiritual, because Mahim, Shamahim, heavens, and the water itself is of the same base. Water also has the ability to have memory in the same way.
Yes.
Torah itself, the first 5 books, is a code that has everything in it. So if you analyze it after the fact, you can see actually historical events linking up and connected. So it's like a matrix of, data bytes or whatever, memory, just recording everything that ever happened on the earth, but in advance. But water's got the same attribute. Water is also connected to the word. In the same way, I think magnetic fields and how it works, there's some context to spiritual things and how they work, specifically regarding Yahweh's creation and all the forces and how angels and those things interact with the physical. So yeah, there might be some interesting.
And that also fits in with man being water, where we get the word memory from, and water holding its memory, and that also links in with how homeopathy works. That the memory of the chemical, even though it's greatly reduced, is still, the memory of it is still within the water.
Yeah, that's right.
And connecting the first verse of Bereshith with the last word of Deuteronomy, I forget how you pronounce it in Hebrew. You could also do the same with the first Genesis 1:1 with the last verse of Revelation, and link those two together.
So what's the last verse in Revelation? What does it say?
Oh, I forget at the moment, but it's got something to do with even so come Lord Jesus, or come Lord Yeshua, something like that, I think it is.
Yeah. That's the theme of the 8th day of Sukkot anyway, and the starting of the new cycle. So yeah, that still rings true. Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. Right, you guys have a blessed Sabbath, and
Likewise.
All right.
Blessings to everyone there as well.
See you later.
Yeah.
Bye.
Shalom. Bye-bye, family in New South Wales.
Adelaide.
Yeah. We'll meet Wednesday.
All right.
Yeah, thank you, Philip.
Shalom.